That was good. That sounded satisfying. All right, guys, we're going to jump into lesson number 5. Lesson number 5 is building resilient faith, overcoming anxiety and depression. So this lesson we'll jump in a little bit more, actually talking more about actual anxiety and depression. But after lunch, it's always one of those sessions where I got to make sure you guys are awake. So if you've been taking notes, this is going to be your time to shine right here, okay? All right, so before we jump into our session topic, I want to take a minute to kind of remind us of everything we've already covered, because we've built. You guys have been working hard, and we've been building a lot, session by session. All right, so we're going to see how much you remember, okay, or how bad I did. Here we go. So session 1, you got the mind matters, understanding the battlefield. Remember, that was last night. Okay, so here's your quick quiz. What was one thing we said about the mind last night in session 1? All you got to do is remember one thing. You're like, man, that was like 12 hours ago. Last night. Say it again. There you go. So that is one. There you go. So what is your name? JD saved you guys, okay? So he helps you guys out. He answered it for the class, right? So thoughts affect emotions. Emotions affect the behavior. We talked about the cognitive triangle. The heart and mind matters biblically. And the idea of like scripture and psychology kind of both agreeing about the inner life and it mattering, okay? All right, session 2, which was this morning, first thing, identifying lies and thought patterns. Okay, here we go, quick quiz. What were some examples of distorted thinking that we talked about? You can just spout them out. What was, okay, so the catastrophizing, mind reading, fortune telling, all or nothing thinking, okay, fortune telling, all right, generalization, personalization, and we said kind of the main ones usually for me are catastrophizing, mind reading, fortune telling, and all or none. Those, I feel like most things fall under those categories, okay? And again, our minds don't just report facts, but they tell stories, right? Then session 3, so that was the middle one this morning. We talked about taking thoughts captive. Y'all remember what tool we use to kind of practice slowing down our thoughts? Huh? What was it? Okay, thought trial. What else? Thought record. There we go. So we used the thought record, and we went through that. And we kind of looked at also the putting thoughts on trial and evidence for versus evidence against. And again, those are just some tools. While we're talking about that, I'll pause and then we'll jump back into our last part. Okay. Go ahead and open up your workbook, because I mentioned to you either last night or this morning that just in case we didn't directly get to everything in the booklet, I did want to let you guys know what else is in there for you to use, okay? So if we're going through it from the cover on, we did the cognitive triangle, and then the next few pages, which is cognitive distortions on this page and these pages, we went through that. And if you keep going, we did putting thoughts on trial, so we did do that. We also did the cognitive model, those practice exercises we did, where you guys were to look at the negative thought of Jason and Gwen, and so we did do that. Okay, then flip the page. So this is where you guys can actually use this and practice this at home once you leave here. These are blanks. So what it does is it's 2 pages here of more exercises. It says write down the alternative rational thought for each situation. What do you think the resulting emotion and behavior might be? And so it gives a situation, and it gives you what the negative thought and the negative emotion and negative behavior will be. And then your job is to come up with, okay, what could be a more balanced, rational thought? And if that happens, what's my new emotion and this new behavior possibly going to be? So you have about 4 situations you can do. So I do encourage you to do that, just because, just like anything else, I can sit there and show you how to throw a baseball, but until you actually throw one yourself, it doesn't mean the same. It doesn't hit the same. And that's what I love about like things that are more workshop style. Like Like when I do couples workshops, I do that. We're very hands-on, and I make the couple do a lot of stuff together. I teach them, and now you got to do it, right? And it's fun, but it's also vulnerable. So, all right. So then if you turn a page, you get to Socratic questioning, okay? These can be Socratic questions can be like very interview-like in a sense, but it's you doing that to yourself. Now, I may do this in a session with someone. I may just kind of walk through certain questions. These questions like help me dig into more information, right? So it says thoughts are like running dialogue in your brain. They come and go fast. So fast, in fact, that we rarely have the time to question them because our thoughts determine how we feel, how we act. It's important to challenge any thought that causes us harm. And so it says, spend a moment thinking about each of the following questions, record thorough responses, elaborate and explain why or why not. And it just basically, it kind of starts to pick apart everything. So what's the thought I'm trying to question? Okay, again, what's the evidence of this thought? Remember, that's familiar because that's in the thought record. The thoughts on trial. Am I basing this thought in facts or feelings? Okay, so it's questioning things. Is this thought black or white when reality is more complicated? Could I be misinterpreting the evidence? Am I making any assumptions? Okay, so it's really making you pick it apart and think. Might other people have different interpretations of this same situation? If so, what could some of their interpretations be of the same thing that I'm thinking? Am I looking at all the evidence or just things that support my own thoughts that I only want to think about? Could my thought be an exaggeration of what's true? Am I having this thought out of habit? Or do the facts actually support it? Did someone pass this thought or belief to me? If so, are they a reliable source? And then you has, is my thought a likely scenario or is it worst case scenario? So as you're working through there, man, you're really picking that question, that thought apart. And that's a part of what like a counselor would likely do with you if you were in a session with someone. They're going to do that and use other tools to try to get you to think deeply. And then the hope is by the time you get to the end, you're like, yeah, man, that's probably not a rational thought, And at least you could understand it and be aware of it and then put something more better in there. If you turn to the next pages, you have countering negative thoughts. It says come up with a rational counter statement for each of the negative thoughts. So again, it's just a way to practice. So they gave you an example up top. Here's a negative thought, but here's more of a rational one. And then you try to do the same for the next two. And then at the bottom, you come up with your own negative ones and your own rational ones. And then the next page is challenging anxious thoughts. Again, you describe a situation. And this one's a little more simple. You can come up with, okay, well, imagine you're faced with the anxiety-producing situation from above. Sometimes I'll do this in session with people. Sometimes I may try this first. This is like a low level, not digging too much, that could just help them have a different perspective. And I'll usually say, well, if you're thinking that, like, okay, well, let's go there. Like, what's the worst possible thing that's going to happen from this? And they'll say, well, X, Y, and Z, okay? I'm like, okay, well, what's then the complete opposite? What's the best possible situation that could happen out of this, okay? And then what happens is the likely is usually falling in the middle. Okay, well, that's the worst case. Okay, what do you think about that one? This is the best case. What do you think about that one? Well, what's something in the middle? What's most likely to take place? Well, this could happen, but this is going to happen. It's all going to be okay, right? And a lot of times that's where you land. And then imagine the worst outcome comes true. Would it still matter 1 week from now, 1 month from now, 1 year from now? And it has a piece at the bottom, okay? And then the last one, besides your thought record, is decatastrophizing, okay? And some of these are very similar, right? What are you worried about? How likely it is that your worry will come true? Give examples of past experiences or other evidences to support your answer. If your worry does come true, again, what's the worst that's going to happen? If your worry does come true, what's most likely to happen? And if your worry comes true, what are the chances you'll be okay in 1 month, 1 week, 1 year, okay? So it's hitting on. So again, these are things that I believe like outside of a counseling setting, even though we would do some of these in a counseling setting, I just want, just know that if things are very difficult and stuck, you could possibly use those But also if they're someone's still getting stuck and the emotion is really, really bad, then in a counseling setting, we would take these a step further, okay? And we'd go beyond this, so just to let you know. So if you ever are in a situation like that and you've done all this and it's still not making much movement in your opinion, well then obviously I would say let's get you to a counseling setting so they can just kind of help you to the next level of those things. All right, now re-engaging. Session number 4 was renewing the mind, the power of perspective. What was session 4 really about? I'll go ahead and just say it. Perspective, repetition, renewal over time, okay, was our last one, okay? And change happens through practice, not pressure, all right? So here we go. At this point, we've learned how to notice and to name and to challenge and redirect our thinking. And so this afternoon, we're going to take kind of a little pivot, and we're going to be asking really more of a bigger question, I think. And the question is, what happens when anxiety or depression shows up anyways, right? Because a lot of things we've been doing, maybe someone is dealing with those things and it's just normal, and they don't have necessarily a mental health diagnosis. But the question I think that pops up is, well, what if all these things continue and it gets really bad? And what happens when the anxiety and depression do show up anyways? And let me ask y'all this, and raise your hands. I just want you to raise your hands if you'd be willing to, if you're okay with that. If you don't have to. It's up to you. But raise your hands. How many of you have ever felt emotionally or mentally worn down? Not from one big thing, but from just a lot of little things over time. Okay, I'm raising my hand too. Okay, so I'm in that boat. All right, so hands down. Next question. How many of you have ever thought, I should be handling this better than I am? Raise your hand, okay? My hand is raised very highly too, okay? And as your hands are up, I want you to kind of know this. If your hand went up, you're not behind, you're not in any deficit in any way. I want you to know you're just human. and that internal pressure, man, the feeling that you should be stronger by now is often what keeps people silent, in my view, about anxiety and depression. But if faith alone eliminated emotional struggle, well then guess what? Ministers would never be burnt out and counselors would all be out of jobs, right? Because here's the truth. We don't say out loud enough faith, and here's I think the truth that we don't say out loud enough is that faith does not make us immune to emotional struggle. I know I was teaching in a church setting one time, actually at my congregation, the Manhattan Central, and I think it was one of the first times I taught a class on mental health. And it was like we were doing what we call short courses on Wednesday nights. And we would have like 3 different classes, and you do like 6 sessions, and then you repeat it again, basically. And that way you could pick like 2 of the 3 classes to go to. And I was doing one on mental health, and it was interesting. I had a class where I had a couple of individuals in the class that they weren't believers in mental health. And this was and at one point I had to talk to the people because I told them, I was like, man, the rest of the class is about to crucify you, because the rest of the class was there wanting to learn about mental health and depression and anxiety, and they viewed it as a real thing and not this made up concept. And they were making comments in class that were really hurting the other people in class. And I finally had to take them to the side. But it taught me in that moment, I was, where in my mind as a minister and then a counselor, I would have never in my mind state or have felt that mental health is not a real thing, right? But a lot of times we would get these cliche answers like, well, if you just have more faith or read your Bible more and be more spiritual, like those things wouldn't be a thing. Right? And often I've heard that a lot, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in our lessons tomorrow morning. But I think the truth that we don't say loud enough at times is that faith does not immune us to emotional struggle. And what faith does, though, is it gives us a way to stay engaged, honestly and humbly and hopefully, especially when struggles show up. And so I think the thing we have to realize is that faith doesn't eliminate struggle. It never was intended to do that, but it changes how we respond to those things that come up along our way. So, so before we talk about what helps, before we talk about tools or scriptures or resilience, we need to understand that what anxiety and depression actually are and what they actually are not as well. Because when we misunderstand them, we're either going to shame ourselves or try to fix the wrong thing in the process. And so kind of part one of this is really like, what is anxiety and really in depression? What are they really, right? So first thing we'll do is kind of understand what is anxiety. And let me ask you guys, like when you think about anxiety, what comes to mind for you? What is anxiety? What have you seen? Worry. Stress. Nervousness. Say it again. Okay. Yeah, it could be an obsession with an issue. What else?
Something where I can't find the middle ground. I feel unbalanced.
Yeah, unbalanced, can't find that middle ground, uneasy. Heavy weight. Feeling overwhelmed. Loss of control, big time, right?
Not knowing what path to take.
Yeah, not knowing what path to take. And some of those things are things that seem to cause anxiety. Or, what does anxiety look like in someone's body? What have y'all seen? Tenseness. I have people sometimes, I'll ask them about that, and they're like, well, Jeremy, my shoulders kind of ache, and I'm tight, and I can feel it in my guts. I can feel it in my butt. They'll say all kind of things. My heart's racing, and my blood pressure feels high. Sometimes I feel red. And it's interesting though if you think about and again, what I want to share today, because I don't want to bore you with I don't want to bore you with too many clinical things, okay? And so I'm not going to necessarily be going through the psychology Bible is, of diagnosing is the DSM-5 TR. That's what our newest thing, and that has all the diagnosis in there. So I'm not going to be giving you all that because I don't think you care about all that stuff. So if you do, we'll talk later. But if we're defining anxiety, okay, I think here's a way that we can look at it, okay, without getting too clinical. Anxiety is really the body's threat detection system. Many times what's going to happen with anxiety is because of that detection system, it is typically going to ask what could go wrong. And then it's preparing for danger, whether it's real or perceived. And so it's interesting, though, like if you look at it, like large-scale studies, really consistently show that anxiety disorders are the most common mental health struggle in the United States, affecting roughly 1 in 5 adults each year. And so, anxiety really becomes a problem. And here's where I think we need to understand, because all of us deal with anxiety, and that's the difference. That's the thing I want you to understand. Is like when we talk about anxiety and depression, there's a non-diagnosable anxiety, non-diagnosable depression. That's the normal stuff we all deal with. We all have moods where we're down. We all have moments where we're anxious, right? It could be a big test coming up at school or a presentation in front of a group of people. You're going to be anxious, okay? But that doesn't mean you're diagnosable for anxiety, okay? It takes a lot more than that, okay? So anxiety becomes a problem when, here's some few things to keep in mind. When your threat system stays turned on, the danger is exaggerated and the body never fully settles, okay? So that's not the technical clinical stuff, okay? But if you just know that, you're going to be good. If your threat system never turns off, the danger feels exaggerated and your body just never feels settled, then yes, there may be something more there that needs to be done clinically. And so clinical anxiety is really like a smoke alarm that just won't shut up, really shut up at all, even when there is no fire that's actually there, okay? And so if we kind of look at one of the key differences, kind of in like a one-sentence summary, it may be something like this, that normal anxiety responds to situations. Clinical anxiety takes over the entire system, okay? So that's the difference. You should feel anxious if you're having to do something that's anxiety-provoking, like standing in front of a crowd or whatever it may be. But if that just takes over your system and now you can't leave the house, okay, and it's turned into something more, then that could be an issue. And also when we think about anxiety from like a Christian perspective, I want you to remember always, anxiety is not a sin. All it is it's a signal. And so clinical anxiety is not a lack of faith. It's the nervous system stuck in overdrive, and it deserves care and support and wisdom, okay? Now we're going to flip to depression. Okay, depression is not just sadness. Now we all deal with down mood at times. If someone passes away in your family, you're going to have a down mood. You're going to have a time where you're down and maybe depressed. But that doesn't automatically mean you have depression necessarily, because it may not last long enough, right? It may not be that debilitating. You should feel down and sad because you lost something. That could be loss of a job, a person, or anything, right? And so depression is not sadness. It's not just sadness, but it's often going to include things like loss of motivation, emotional numbness, mental fog, and also fatigue. Depression ends up affecting 1 in 6, so at some point in their lifetime. And many times it's also really strongly linked to prolonged stress and loss and burnout and things like that. So depression is often the mind and body kind of saying, hey, I've been carrying too much for too long. Okay, and maybe the more simple way to even say it is like normal depression is like grief or emotional soreness. Okay, it hurts, but it heals. Clinical depression is like emotional paralysis. The pain doesn't just hurt, it weighs everything down, right? And that's when we would need to pivot to something that's a little more substantial when it comes to like counseling, okay? And go ahead.
So, would you say then that baggages of any sort, PTSD, any baggages, it more often would lead to this kind of, what would you call it, state of mind, state of being, if not dealt with, right?
It can, yeah. I mean, there are things that, you know, I mean, I've talked to people, like PTSD, for example, is one. Like you can take, 10 soldiers and they all experience the exact same thing overseas in a war situation. They see people get blown up and worse. And 2 of them may come back with actual diagnosable PTSD and 8 don't. And it's baffling to us. Like, how does that happen, right? So there's and this is where everyone is wired differently. Some people in those situations are, whether it's their experiences of life or the way they're just wired, like I say, kind of from the factory, it doesn't seem to affect them the same way. Maybe they have some ability to compartmentalize better and in a healthy way that's not bad for them, where they're not just ignoring it. So it's hard to say, because I mean, some people, even like with trauma, someone can have a horrible trauma, and as time goes on, because time doesn't heal everything, but time with the right thinking does heal. So that's the caveat. Like,
But you're seeing something there that, in a sense, you're saying that people handle it differently and it won't necessarily affect. What I'm thinking is that it will affect. Baggages and PTSD and on will affect if it's not dealt with.
yeah, it can, for sure. And I guess what we look for then is we look for some of those indicators, right? And the indicators, it's going to be what's showing up in our body, what other symptomology is happening. Like if you're married, what's your spouse noticing? Are they noticing you detach or separate yourself or be isolated, or do they notice your mood is down? Well, it could be because of that stuff. Maybe that stuff, a lot of times I'll notice people over the years. I've noticed that, and I don't know if this is a real thing or not. I've just noticed this, that I'll get a lot of people like that get into their 30s and they'll start counseling, and for some reason, I don't know all the reasoning behind it, but for some reason, whatever happened in their childhood and their teens finally gets elevated enough in them, it starts to bubble up. And then now they start counseling, and every time it's something that happened years ago. And I don't know if it just they were suppressing it for a long time, but I notice it all the time. They'll get in their 30s and 40s, and all of a sudden they're finally dealing with something that happened a long time ago. And I think the symptoms just got so bad, they were like, I got to go talk to somebody. And I've had people tell me that, like, I don't want to be here, but like, I can't deal with this stuff, so I'm here. Especially guys. No guys usually want to come to counseling. And I shouldn't say that. There are guys that come nowadays, but guys in their 70s and 60s don't come to counseling a lot. So they have a different view of counseling often, but that has changed over the past 30 years, so it's been good. But no, some people through time and energy on their own depending on their wiring and stuff, may do well to handling stuff by themselves. And for some reason, they have learned how to think about it and reframe it and process it differently, and it helps them move forward, right? And it actually is healthy. But I would almost say they're the exception to the rule. You know, you have more people who they don't figure out how to do that, but you know, other things complicate that. Stress of life, being overwhelmed or burnout, or you know, having too much going on, that can be a roadblock for people, because down there they don't feel like they have the time or the mental energy to go there until things get really bad, and then they start drinking or start doing things that are out of the norm, and then that sends them to therapy, and then they process those things. So, but good question. But you know, again, if you think about normal depression is like grief or emotional soreness, it hurts, but it heals. Clinical depression is like emotional paralysis. The pain doesn't just hurt, it weighs everything down. And again, clinical depression is not a lack of faith. It's the mind and body under prolonged strain or stress. It deserves care, compassion, and support. Okay, I want you all to look at a passage here. This is Psalm chapter 42, verse 5. And here's what this passage says: "Why are you cast down, O my soul, and why are you in turmoil within me?" And it's so interesting to me when I look at this verse. It seems basically almost like a sermon that the writer is preaching to himself. Okay, if you think about it. And the writers seem to be going through something very difficult. Could have included a number of things like conflict or persecution or more. He is feeling internal pain, it seems, and depression, like heaviness, potentially external pressure and spiritual longing. And he seemed to be a faithful believer in God with a strong faith, and yet he's showing here that even faithful servants can experience deep sorrow, right? And I guess my question would be, when we're thinking about this, does this sound like weak faith? Or does this actually sound like honest faith? I think it sounds like honest faith. The passage gives language really to this inner pain that God, does not shame emotional honesty, but God, man, He's inviting honesty before He invites resolution. I think one of the clearest pictures of anxiety and depression really in the Bible probably comes from a prophet at the height of his faith. And then that's in 1 Kings chapter 19. Man, if you think about Elijah, and just kind of setting the scene, right? Right before 1 Kings 19, Elijah, I believe, is at more or less the height of his ministry. Publicly confronts the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. High pressure, kind of life or death moment where God shows up in the most powerful way. Fire falls from heaven. The people turn back to the Lord. It's a spiritual victory most of us could only dream about. And then almost immediately Elijah receives a threat on his life. And then there's no celebration period. There's no time for rest. There's no decompression. Elijah runs. He isolates. And when the adrenaline kind of wears off, he collapses emotionally. And in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4, he says, "It is enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life." Okay? What would surprise you about this moment? What would surprise you? What? Yeah. I think one of the biggest things that we think about is when you really take the entirety of this scenario into play, is this came after like him getting to see God show up in one of the most major ways possible. In miraculous ways, and I mean just this huge thing, right? And this comes right after this big, really spiritual success. And an emotional collapse, though, I believe often follows prolonged stress. And if you think about like the psychology kind of tie-in, right, can be like, adrenaline crashes and, exhaustion narrows perspective, right? That's what it looks like here. And fear feels louder when we're depleted. And maybe that's somewhat of what Elijah was going through in this place, but I want you to kind of notice, though, I want you to, if we were to read through the whole passage, and maybe you know the story, how does God react? What does God do first? Does God go after him and shun him or treat him badly? What's God do first? Yeah. God does not correct theology. He provides, right? He provided rest. He provided food. He provided safety. And what God ends up doing is addressing Elijah's condition before he addresses his calling. So I'm going to get you to, again, I want you to pair up with someone, okay? And here's what I want you to do, okay? We're going to step into a little bit of vulnerability, okay? And here's what you're going to do with your partner, okay? You're going to turn to them, okay? And here's the question that's going to be asked. When you're going to ask your partner, when you're overwhelmed, what do you usually need first? Correction, reassurance, rest, or support, okay? And if you're the one asking and listening, okay, you do not try to fix it. I just want you to listen, okay? Okay, so the question's up here. Okay, so I'm going to say mark, set, go, and you turn to your person, and you ask the question, and you listen to them and see what they say, okay? Ready, mark, set, go.
Has a question and she wants to ask it so that everybody can hear. So if you get a second, it was something about something you said a while ago.
Okay.
She just didn't want to interrupt your train of thought.
Okay.
When you were going.
Yeah, sounds good.
The world isn't going to tumble down. It's never going to tumble down.
All right, you guys ready? I'm going to get some feedback from you guys. So the question you were asking to the other person was, when you're overwhelmed, what do you usually need first? Correction, reassurance, rest, or support? Okay? So someone told you their answer. So tell me, so some of you tell me what you heard from the other person. What did you hear? Reassurance? Reassurance, okay. Actually, you know what? Oh, I'm sorry. Let's do this. Let's go by row, okay? What did you guys hear out of these four from each other? Support? 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 Reassurance? Reassurance? Rest? Rest? Reassurance? Rest? Reassurance? Support? Support? Not correction, support. Reassurance? 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 Rest? Support? Support? Reassurance? Mario? Reassurance? Rest? 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 Huh? Reassurance? In the hat? Reassurance? Correction then. All right. Support? Rest. Rest. Reassurance? Support? Starbucks. All right. It's at the bottom. It's like in the, you can barely see it. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm actually with you. We'll go get some Starbucks later, yeah. Okay. All right, back row. Rest. 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 Reassurance. Support. All of it. Okay, good. There you go. Support. All of it. Support, then rest. Same thing. Support, rest, support. Rest, reassurance. Rest. Rest. Sound booth. Rest. Did I miss anybody? All right, what did y'all hear? Okay, yeah. I mean, we did the whole room, right? I mean, I think I didn't. Did I miss you? Which support? Okay, there we go. So you see, you'd have messed up if you said correction. You know, there, like okay. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. We went around the entire room of who knows how many are here, and out of these four, there wasn't one person that said, my number one is I want you to correct me, right? I want you to get on to me, tell me how bad spiritually I am and how wrong I am doctrinally, right? And how awful a Christian I am. No, everything was either reassurance, rest, or support. And as we went around the room, it was very different, right? And the thing I want you to remind you, notice again how different the answers are, but also how normal they are, including Starbucks, by the way, okay? And in a second, that's going to bring us to what I think is an important truth about resilience. Someone had a question. I was going to make sure I got you.
I have a question about something you said previously. You said when the events happen, learning how to compartmentalize in a healthy way. What does that look like? Is that the thought records, or how would I go about doing that? Because the reason why I'm asking is anxiety and we just really go hand in hand for many, many years. So
Yeah.
been through therapy, been through thinking that I was like terrible and not strong and all the things through many, many years.
Yeah.
And I do, when something happens, I will lock it away. And I just I put it up in the vault in my brain and I lock it. And I'm not doing it healthy. I know that I'm not, but it's like my coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So what should we do to have that healthy way to process? Is it the thought record, or how do I go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the first step would be like acknowledgement, like you're acknowledging, hey, I know this about me. So, I mean, that's always the first part is, awareness. Because the problem is some people are not aware, and they have that going on. And then usually there's a lot of negative symptoms that end up popping up, and that could lead to lots of things like chemical dependency and lots of other things, which is just a signal. That's just a symptom of something greater going on inside of them. If they're going to something like that, or if they're ruining every relationship they have, right? That's probably a symptom to me of something else going on inside. So there has to be awareness first, and yeah, I mean, you said it. In the end, a lot of it depends on, well, how much uncomfortableness am I okay with? Can I, there's, in what degree, if I hold on to this, is it going to eat me alive and be bothersome to me? And number one, the people around you are probably going to tell you. I mean, husband's probably going to tell you, friends are going to tell you, loved ones are going to tell you, unless they're scared of you or something, but generally they're going to say something to you. They're going to notice something that will probably push you to a place where you're like, okay, maybe I need to work on this. So for a lot of people, it gets to that point. How much can I handle of uncomfortableness and dealing with this anxiety or depression, whatever it may be? And usually that pushes them to a place where they're like, okay, I know this is not something I need to hide from anymore. And then, like you said, that probably leads them to counseling. Counseling one time can be what people need. Everything's different. Like some people go once and they're geared where they figure out the tools and they leave there and they do them and they do pretty good. And in other people, there's a lot more sticky situations that are, like I always picture like all these tentacles that are going and touching all kind of other things. And those are really difficult, and it could take years in therapy, to unwind all that and get them to a better place. And there's this, it's hard to say because there's so many difficult things, like I was talking to someone recently, where she took on negative messaging when she was a child, come from a divorced family and parents were kind of harsh to her, and she kind of had to earn their love. And well, that stuck into most of her life, and she became a pleaser, and she never wanted to not please or people, because it made her feel defective if she didn't. So she would overcompensate by pleasing everyone, so she'd never have to feel the way she did when she was little, And those like that, those are sticky. Those are way stuffed away in the past, and we have to really build that person up and really challenge a lot of stuff in their life and help them to, because they have to talk themselves, and along of it, they have to talk themselves into the fact that they're not those things. And that could take a long time, because it took a long time to get them there. It's not going to take the same amount of time to get them unwound from that, but it could take years in therapy to really get, because they're having to convince themselves along the way. I don't know if that answers your question perfectly. It's tricky. I mean.
Right. I understand. And it's for different people, but like I have an arsenal of tools in which I use that I've learned through therapy over a number of years and situations, and self-help books and whatnot. So I have an arsenal of tools, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what else can I add in there? Like what's that I need a go-to? Like I know when I start the anxiety, I call it what it is, and I name it, and I realize that it is my anxiety, and then I stop that process, and that's taken years to figure out how to do.
Yeah.
But what other tools, like if you had immediately something that you said, try this, like what would that be like a good tool to put in your toolbox? Is it that thought records, or like what should I do to put in my toolbox?
Yeah. If it's that difficult and that deeply rooted, I wouldn't do any of those things. I would, and here's why. I mean, and not that I wouldn't really try any of those things, but things of that nature go beyond. You would do these things, but you would need to go further. Like if it's cognitive behavioral therapy, like with something like that, the next step in this. Because this doesn't really get to in our workshop. It's difficult. To get to this kind of level of stuff we would need. Really, what would be needed is to get to the core belief that you have. So all our automatic thoughts that we have, when we have them, remember those are the automatic negative thoughts. Those are always tied to these lenses that we view life through. So that core belief. The core beliefs we have, those are the problem makers. Those are the things that are these feel very concrete, and we can't pull our way from that belief system. And those are beliefs about everything from God and religion and doctrine to your favorite football teams, right? It's just who's our Georgia Tech fan in here? Somebody? Okay. Oh, there you are. Y'all are. Yeah. It's just I would imagine I would have a hard time talking you guys into becoming, Georgia fans, right? You'd probably say it's not possible. I'm a Florida State fan. That'd be like you trying to make me a Miami Hurricane fan or a Gator fan, right? It's not going to happen. Now, could I loosen you up to that some? Maybe I could talk nice about the Yellow Jackets, and we could go to ball games together, and I may loosen you to that. But that lens is so stuck, right? It's hard to pull away from that. Well, those same lenses, we have lenses how we view ourselves. The big ones are usually worthiness, hopelessness, helplessness, lovability. Those are probably the major lenses that we have. So where it goes therapeutically usually, and that's where it needs to go. It needs to go in with a therapist that's probably certified in CBT. Because a lot of therapists do use CBT, but this is where they stop. They don't usually go any further than this. Well, these are good tools to put in a toolbox. And they're helpful in a lot of situations. But when you got the really deep-rooted stuff, you need cognitive processing. That's trauma-focused, but them finding out what your core beliefs are, and then finding out the distortion in the core belief, and then finding specific ways to whittle and chip away at that until you are able to come out the other side. but that's the problem. There's a lot of therapists that they put on that on their profile, but they don't have that extensive training to get you to that point. And so you go for a while and you still feel you're kind of like, well, I'm still dealing with all this stuff. And that's usually why. So.
And one more question.
Yeah.
So if that's the case and if that's what people are going through, like I'm saying with me personally, but I'm sure there's others that are in that struggle with anxiety. And I've tried to talk about it more to normalize it.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, if I'm on anti-anxiety medications and I have a therapist and I'm reading and struggling, you know, and I'm digging in, creating a toolbox for me. So is that what needs to happen for someone, that we need to go deeper into these core roots of why this anxiety started, or why, through what lens I see myself? Is that like what you recommend for someone, that it's not just medication, it's not just like these little tools, it's like going deep down to find the root?
It can be, yeah. And that's where, again, probably everyone is different. And sometimes it's, I have people do this sometimes, you know, because like I'm not trained in EMDR or brain spotting or ART. ART is accelerated resolution therapy. EMDR is very well known for trauma, like deep-rooted childhood stuff, especially, you know, PTSD. And then brain spotting is that way too, but it also is good for anxiety. And so, you know, and everyone's different. You know, like I have some people who are very regimented, and so CBT is really good for them. And I have some people come in and I may see them for a while, but they may need something in addition. So sometimes we do that. I may go as far as I can with someone, and then I may send them to someone who's EMDR trained or like certified, or ART or one of these, just because I want to see, can we do a little bit more, because it's a very different thing. You know, like EMDR is, you know, it's tapping and eye movement, and the other two are the same way. But what it does is it helps the two lobes of the brain like talk to each other. So you're actually talking as you're staring at someone's finger, and it's been really successful. And so sometimes I would want to do that. You know, if someone has done all those things, then we're like, okay, well, we may need to go a completely different path, and that's what I would usually recommend at that point. But otherwise, yes, I would say, yeah. The big three I always push for, that have nothing to do with like the clinical pieces necessarily, is, you know, you getting 7, 8 or 8 hours of sleep a night? Are you exercising, and are you on a diet, right? Because the three things that you can do that has nothing to do with cognitive stuff is the sleep and the exercise. They just found really recently, they did a study on depression, for example, and took a big group, split them in half, and this group they gave antidepressants. In this group, they had them walk 4 days a week for 45 minutes. And they brought them back together, and the results were identical. And so one thing I'm pushing all my patients to do is walk for 45 minutes 4 days a week. so see if they're depressed, but also anxious. Because God's given us He's given us all these chemicals in our body, you know, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, epinephrine. He's given us all those things, and we just have to activate them. You know, so getting good sleep, okay, and having good sleep hygiene, being able to just don't eat like bad, like, you know, don't go at the fast food every day, because that's not doing you any favors. And then being able to get some degree of exercise, whether it's weightlifting or like aerobic exercise. And if you just do those things, and then I think the beauty of the church is God gave us a way to activate oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hugging hormone. It's a proximity hormone. Okay, so think about this. Your whole life in church, the moment you walk in that door, what do you get? Man, you get all that, right? Hugging, kissing, bear hugs, side hugs. You get all of that, right? And God gave us the church, and it's a huge benefit to be able to have that proximity with people along the way. Or Waffle House, if you ever go there, man, those benches are really close. I don't know if y'all have sat in those things. It's hard not to have oxytocin go on and like bond you together with whoever you're with. So thank you for the questions. Those are really good questions. And again, I don't know if I answer everything perfectly, but I'll definitely try as much as I can. Okay. All right. Resilience is built. It's not summoned. How would you guys describe resiliency? Like, what's y'all's definition? What comes to mind when you think about resilient? Bounce back. Never fails.
Never give up.
Keep on keeping on.
Persevere. Never give up.
Never give up. Perseverance. What up? Say it again. Get back up. Okay, when you fall, get back up. Yeah, positive energy. Okay. I want you to think about this. Resiliency is not necessarily toughness, but it is the ability to recover and be able to remain engaged. That's the big thing. So it grows through perspective and practice and support. Even psychological research, consistently shows resilience increases when people feel understood and when they feel supported, not pressured to just be stronger. Okay. What helps you recover when life knocks you down? What's helped you guys in the past to recover when life kind of knocks you down? Family? Okay.
I think being able to sit down and talk with somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, being able to just talk it out. What else? What's...
My wife.
Okay, wife, right? She a good listener? She's a good listener?
Better than me.
What else? What kind of helps you recover when life knocks you down? Prayer. Okay, good. Solitude. Yep.
Hanging out with friends.
Hanging out with friends. Okay, so like community.
In one of my situations, it was responsibilities. Kept me going.
Yeah, sometimes it is. Yeah, sometimes even like people who are grieving through something very difficult, yeah, I'm not saying they ignore the grief, but sometimes staying busy, occupying their minds and what's going on actually becomes a help to get them through some of that difficult stuff, right? As long as they're not using it as an excuse to ignore it, that's okay, right? I want to read, this comes from Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 31. Isaiah chapter 40 verse 31 says, "They who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength." And the thing I want you to kind of watch in this is that, waiting is not passive. Strength is actually renewed over time. And so think about it, like resilient faith really commits to endurance and not these quick fixes along the way, right? And so knowing what helps also means knowing what hurts, okay? So I'm going to get you guys to help me. We're gonna do a little thing called what helps and what hurts. Are y'all ready? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list some responses. You guys are supposed to just call out whether you think what I just said is helpful or if is it harmful. Okay? Here we go. Everything happens for a reason. Helpful or harmful? Okay? And why is it harmful?
You mean this rotten thing was supposed to happen to me?
Yeah.
Where I'm
It minimizes, right? It often shuts down grief and then it minimizes the pain. And remember, and we know that these things are probably well-meaning, but if we're being honest, is this helpful or is this harmful? Okay, next one. Will others have it worse than you? Helpful or harmful? Harmful, right? Because think about it, it kind of creates shame instead of perspective. Man, shame is horrible. Shame eats you alive, right? You think guilt is bad? Shame is guilt on steroids, okay? It's really, really bad, okay? Next one. Well, you just need to trust God more. Is that helpful or harmful? Harmful, right? It sounds spiritual. But again, I believe what it's actually doing is actually placing blame, okay? What about this? That sounds really heavy. Helpful, right? Because it names the weight without fixing. Fixing is not that is not your thing. Your job is not to fix. You can't fix, okay? In the end, that person they're the one, them and God's going to fix it, right? What about this? I'm glad you told me. Helpful or harmful? Helpful, right? Because think about it, just that helps normalize, but also reinforces safety and connection with that person. Now I feel like I can go to that person because, man, they told me they were glad that they told me. So now I feel like I have an open connection to them, okay? What about this? Hey, what's been the hardest part for you lately? Harmful or helpful? Helpful, right? Because it invites deeper sharing, okay? What about this? Well, it'll pass, just give it time. Harmful, right? Now, I'm not saying that's not true. It may be true, but feels very dismissive if you hear that in that moment, okay? Last one. Would it help if we talk about next steps together? Helpful, right? Because it's collaborative, but it's not directive, right? You're not telling them what they need to do or what they have to do. You're not beating them over the head with the Bible, okay? Because that's not going to help them. None of y'all put down correction, remember, when y'all did our exercise. No one did, okay? So think about this. Connection heals. Shame always isolates, okay? And I love like Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2. It says, bear one another's burdens, right? Because burdens, think about this, burdens are meant to be shared. Isolation, go ahead.
I wanted to point out something I noticed, a pattern. So when something that's hurtful, I've noticed that it's something that's belittling and pushing them away. When it's something that's helpful, you're being compassionate and you're pulling them towards you.
Yeah, that's a good point, right? And so that becomes really the superpower in a way. You know, I always tell people the biggest thing you can do, if you can't do anything else, I guarantee you can listen to someone. I'm not saying it's easy sometimes to listen, but you can listen.
I think that was such a good point. I would appreciate if you said it for the people that couldn't hear it that may be streaming.
Yeah, so she said, I know you said the second part, like helping them makes you feel like you're pulling them towards you. And then you said, what was the first part you said?
When it's something that hurts you, you're pushing them away.
Yeah, so if it's something that's hurtful, it's pushing away. Helping is actually drawing that person into you, okay? And so yeah, I think it would also include I have to be careful, just like in these illustrations, I have to be careful even what I say. Which again, if you think about it, if you create a pause for yourself, some of these things that the ones that were hurtful, you may not say anymore because you're not letting your anxiety get the best of you in that moment and just spouting out whatever sounds good in the moment, right? Okay, Jason?
I got one for you. I've seen both reactions to. I know what you're going through. Is that helpful or hurtful?
You better know what they're going through.
I've had more negative responses from that than positive responses in general, you know. Because I'm even careful, like when I do counseling with people, how I word things. You know, if I say anything, and I even try to be careful if I say it, like I may say I can only imagine what you're going through. Because that is true. I can only imagine it because I've never gone through it.
I'm going to disagree with this because it does depend how you verbalize it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you get a little older, you've been through a lot, and the Lord can use that to help others.
Mm-hmm.
When people have chronic pain, this is just an illustration.
Yeah.
And nothing can soothe you because the pain is real. And you know somebody else has walked a mile in your shoes. Then telling somebody, again, choosing the right words,
Mm-hmm.
I know what you're going through.
Yeah.
Helps. Whenever I've heard that, helps me to understand I'm not alone.
Yeah.
And wow,
Mm-hmm.
it gives me a source that I could know would understand. If
Yeah.
I ever had a talk.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it depends, you know, because I've had people tell me things that I didn't know they were dealing with I was glad to know because I could better handle it. I think sometimes, yeah, it's probably going to be more how you say it or what's the setting, what's the platform that it's being kind of said from. You know, it may be easier if it's said in a group of people and they hear that and they'll take it differently because it's not being said directly to them. But sometimes, and everyone's different. Some people can take it directly, and that's okay.
I think
Yeah.
Because when you say, I know what you're going through, you're putting it more on you.
Yeah.
But if you say something different, like, what you feel is valid, like, I understand, I feel like it's putting it more on them and putting the perspective on them instead of putting it towards you.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, the words that you use probably become a big deal. And you're right, because if that's happening, the challenge is like in that moment, it's like you don't want that to become about you, because in the moment it's about them. And can that happen? Can someone all of a sudden turn it into something that's directed towards them and completely take the focus away from the person that needs it? Yeah, it happens sometimes. And so we don't want that. So it does. I think it matters how we say it. Okay.
On that same topic, I've heard this working with some of the teens a lot. I've heard, no, you don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't get it.
Yeah.
Even though you might.
Mm-hmm.
That can be a turn off to somebody that you can be talking to and they say, no, you don't get it.
Yeah.
You don't understand what I'm feeling right now.
Yeah. And then I would, and that may be correct, and I would pivot and say, hey, tell me more about your experience with that. Like, tell me more. I want to know. Because and just say, hey, you're right. I don't know your experience with it. So I would love for you to tell me more about that. And all of a sudden that opens them up to share with you, and there's an endearment factor there. And now they may probably feel a lot more safe with you now. So good. All right. Let's see. All right, so we're gonna jump to God meets us in weakness. Here we go. Our scripture is going to 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. And this passage says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." And I want you to notice what God does not say here, okay? He doesn't say, my power will be made perfect once your weakness is gone. He does not say that. He says his power is made perfect in the weakness. So God does not wait for emotional strength. God does not wait for mental clarity. God does not wait for the struggle to be over. Weakness is not a barrier to God's work. It's often actually often the context of it, okay? And so, looking at this from the perspective of anxiety and depression often make people feel disqualified, like they need to fix themselves before God can use them or meet them. And really, I believe this verse is actually saying the opposite. It says God's grace shows up inside the struggle, not after the struggle. God does not ask us to bring strength, and that's because He supplies the strength. And I think a good example is if you think about Paul. Think about him for a second. Paul talks about a thorn, sometimes something that I feel like was persistent and unwanted and unresolved. But if you think about it, it wasn't removed. It wasn't explained. It was sustained by grace, really, to me. And sometimes God doesn't remove the thorn. He meets us while we are carrying it, though. And faith doesn't then eliminate weakness. It gives weakness a place to land in the long run. And when weakness has a place to land, it no longer has to isolate us or define us. So here's my question for you. Where have you been waiting or wanting? Where have you been waiting to feel stronger before letting God actually meet you? Where have you been waiting to feel stronger before letting God meet you? My hope, and I think the hope of the gospel, is not that we become unbreakable. It's that God is faithful when we're not. And I want us to remember that faith doesn't eliminate weakness. It gives weakness a place to land. And so as we kind of close this lesson in this session, I want you to think about which of these felt maybe familiar today to you. For you, is it persistent worry? Is it some sort of emotional exhaustion? Is it some sort of loss of motivation for you? Is it maybe feeling spiritually numb? And if any of those in some ways resonated with you, I want you to know you are not broken and you are not alone. So in our final session today, we're going to talk about how the church can become a place of healing instead of silence. We're going to take a 10-minute break. So be back. We'll start back at, what time is it? 2:15. There we go. All right, so mark, set, go. See y'all in 10 minutes.